Right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for signing up. So today we're here to discuss water companies' price review and planning. So I'm Rachel Jones from the Planning Advisory Service. We're part of the Local Government Association, funded mostly by DLUC, or now MHCLG, but also by DEFRA and Natural England. So we support planning authorities with planning system challenges, and today is an example of one of the ways that we do that. So the purpose of the event is to cover the step change in investment that's planned by water companies from 2025 to 2030 to help share knowledge on the work that's coming forward and to share best practice across the areas and to look at ways we can address some of the potential challenges. So we're joined by representatives from Water UK. We've got Dan and Nick on the call, who'll be introducing things in a moment. And then we'll also hear from Gareth, Emma, Dave and Jeff, who are going to be giving focused talks from their respective water companies. So welcome to you all. In terms of the agenda, we plan to have two areas of Q&A today. One after the introductory talk from Dan and Nick, and then a second session after we've heard from the water companies. We've set up the Q&A function, so please add questions in there and feel free to like or thumbs up the questions that you would like us to ask. And also we'll hopefully have time for people to raise their hand and come in to ask questions as well. Hopefully we'll be able to cover all of the questions in this session. We do have quite a tight focus today, and this is on the planning challenges that are coming forward from water company investments and the way that planning authorities and water companies can work together to address those issues particularly. So just to let you know that we're not covering any of the wider issues that can often come up in the press. As I've said before, we're also recording this session so we can share it with others that couldn't attend. Okay, so that's just the short introduction. So I'm going to swiftly pass over to Dan and Nick at the Water UK to give an introduction to the water company's price review and planning.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rachel, both for the invitation today, and thank you everyone for attending for what should be a really, really interesting session. Just to introduce myself, I am Dan Walker-Nolan. I am the the Director of Policy here at Water UK. And I am joined today, I'm very pleased to say, by Nick Periplov, who is our Head of Sustainable Development, and we will be giving what I would like to think of as a scene-setting presentation on the context of the water industry, what water companies do, and a little bit about the sort of current work that we're most focused on, which is the price review. But firstly, I'll probably go into who Water UK are. So for those of you who don't know, we are the trade association for the water sector in the UK, and we are truly UK-wide. I think that's the important thing to say. So we represent all English companies, Welsh companies, Scottish Water, Northern Ireland Water, plus all Crown dependencies and territories in the UK. So we truly are the voice of the water industry in the UK, I'm pleased to say. And in terms of what we're going to talk about today, it's a few things really, but there's something quite big happening at the moment, which you might have seen in the headlines earlier this week, called PR24. Oh,
any issues? Say goodbye. Going home.
All right. Rachel, should we get people who aren't speaking to mute themselves? Thank you.
That's yes, I've just muted one. So yes, please can you mute? Thank you.
Oh, I was muted for a second there. I think we're all okay. We're all good. We will be talking about the price review, which is the exercise that's undertaken every 5 years in the water industry to set price and service incentives. And this one will cover the 2025 to 2030 period. It's going to be a really big period for water companies. We've got a significant programme of improvement on storm overflows, new water resources coming through to meet the challenge of rising population and climate change. Planning is absolutely essential and will grow in importance. So we've got this scene setter here, but we've also got the experts who are working in companies on the ground trying to get planning applications through, who will talk to you about the challenges we face, and hopefully we will find some common ground on some of the improvements that we are looking to make. Just moving on to the next slide, please, Rachel. So I thought it'd be good to pause here on the next slide, if that's okay. Perfect. It's on what a water company is. Just be a little bit philosophical, step back for a bit. And I thought we might do some audience participation. So if anyone sort of wants to put up their hand or put something in the Q&A on what they think a sort of water company is for and what they do, I think that might be quite revealing. Please don't be shy. Okay, doesn't look like we've got any takers, Rachel, but that's okay because I'm happy to fill in any gaps. And I think the reason for going through this slightly, oh yeah, there we go, provide clean drinking water. I think that's basically the most important thing. So thank you very much, Louise. Anyone else, anything else they think water companies do? Jeff. Are you able to come off mute, Jeff?
Apologies. Hi, Jeff Winsley, Watch Council. In my view, a water company is essentially a company that manages both the available water within a system to provide drinking water for homes, businesses, and so forth, but also manages the wastewater effluent from houses and businesses, and does so in a manner which clearly is also looking at the ability to save water resources wherever possible, but also has quite a lot of challenges, both in terms of pricing, which is a customer point, but also dealing with planning. It's very much around, how can we help planning and planning help us in terms of managing things around things like the AMP program. So the program of investment that is set within a plan that each of the water companies are legally obliged to essentially produce for Ofwat, and planning can certainly have an interface with that, and we're certainly building good relations with the water companies in our area. So I hope that's helpful.
That is fantastically helpful. Thank you. You've basically taken most of my points. So thank you. And you've touched on a lot of things that I'm going to talk about here. So on the next slide, I've called out 4 main jobs that we consider sort of water companies to have. So the first one, and that's the things you're picking up on mostly, Jeff, a provision of potable water, wastewater management, ops and maintenance of the system, accountable to our customers and communities, and a risk management authority, so on flooding and that sort of stuff. But there are also other things, roles that we play, which I think are important for us to draw up. So statutory obligations, we provide statutory obligations, and we deliver them. So, for example, nutrient removal for final effluent to reduce eutrophication in rivers, storm overflows. So the Environment Act has statutory obligations on us to reduce operation of storm overflows to an average of 10 per year by 2050. But we're also a planner. So we plan ourselves, not planning writ large in terms of town planning, but our water resource management plans set out for a 25-year period between now and 2050 how we'll have enough potable water and how we will deal, like I said earlier, with that issue of sort of climate change, population growth. We have plans that we set out again to 2050 on drainage and wastewater management, making sure our sewers have sufficient capacity to deal with the wastewater that is going to be generated. And then the final thing that I'd like to just touch on, which again might be lost sometimes, but is important to bear in mind, is that water companies are a massive landholder. Sorry, a landholder and landowner. So we have massive holdings in the Northwest in particular. So our sites contain SSSIs, so sites of special scientific interest, sites of outstanding natural beauty, which means that companies are both providers and procurers of environmental services. So tree planting, flood attenuation, habitat restoration, we do lots of different things. So essentially those core sort of tasks which you will hear about in the papers, and we obviously put a lot of emphasis on, are just one facet of what companies do, and they really do fulfill a number of different functions which are useful to the state and to citizens. Rachel, if you don't mind coming on to the next slide. And this is just an overview really of how the sector is set up. So apologies if you have already seen it, but the sector in England and Wales I think that sort of the most important features are that we have monopoly providers. So you're not able, if you are a householder, to choose which company you have. We have water and sewage companies who provide both water and wastewater services, and water-only companies, and they interact. And water-only companies will work with sewage providers in the water and sewage companies to provide those services for customers in different parts of the country. There is some retail competition in the non-household sector through new and appointment variations, so that is important. That retail competition does exist, but not in the household space. And there is a competition in developer services, so that is for new connections to housing, etc., etc. And there's also competition in delivery. So, for example, the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which you might have heard of, was delivered through something called CIPRA, which is a specified infrastructure projects direction, which means that a lot of those really big infrastructure projects aren't actually delivered by the water company. They are procured by the water company and they're delivered by others. So, you know, although there are monopoly providers, there's competition in various aspects, and it's very important, I think, for the sector that it bears down on costs and that it's as efficient as possible. I think that's basically my takeaway point there. And it's also worth bearing in mind that when you hear about the water sector, and, you know, there have been lots of stories about the sector in the news recently, and not all of them positive. It's worth bearing in mind that it's not an analogous sector. There are differences in geography, climate, topography, hydrology, and that's all crucial to management of water. So there's no such thing as a typical company. So some companies serve mainly from groundwater sources, others surface water, so fluvial, so rivers mostly. Some companies are in regions that are more hilly than others. Some have challenges with mostly rural areas and customers being very far apart, whereas others have mostly urban areas and customers that, you know, are probably too close together for their liking. So, you know, there are a lot of different challenges that the sector has. So there's not really a one sort of right way of doing things, and the sector has to innovate and do things sort of in a way that makes sure that their circumstances are reflected. And I suppose the final point here from me is that in the future, and this is something we can talk about extensively because it is part of the AMP8 investment programme, we are expecting to see water moved around the country much more. And that, again, is because of climate change and because the climate is getting hotter. We are much more likely to see water from the rainy north, essentially, transported to the drier south, so that we can balance that supply and demand on a national level and make sure that we've got enough potable water for the population that we have. And so that's just an overview that I thought would be helpful to provide for context. And now I'm going to pass to Nick, who is going to talk a little bit about our regulatory framework, and in particular, what we've seen through the recent draft determinations for the ongoing price review.
Yes, great. Rachel, could we click through to the next one, please? Great, yeah. So this is just a very simplified view of some of the key players and actors involved in the sector. Clearly, the key relationship is between the company and our customers. We're there to effectively, you know, serve them, and in return they pay their bills. So that's kind of the key relationship. But in amongst that, there's a whole suite of different regulators and agencies involved in what we do. So just going around the clock, there's the Consumer Council for Water, which provides a bit of a consumer protection interface, advocating on behalf of customers, also hearing certain types of complaint. We have a separate regulator for our very, very stringent and meticulously enforced drinking water standards via the DWI. So they audit the companies against some of the sampling that they do, and have an enforcement function, amongst other things, in the space of clean water. Clearly a huge role for DEFRA as the sponsor department, kind of owning the water and environment space in setting the legislative framework and overall kind of strategic direction and policy that the sector operates within. Just skipping to the top left, all the stuff in grey is there in grey because we won't be going into too much detail in it today, but just to flag that the relationship between the water companies and our economic regulator has its own regulator in the Competition and Markets Authority. But the main thing on the table for discussion today is the price review, and the main actors there are primarily Ofwat as the economic regulator, and then the Environment Agency, who have a key role in determining the environmental programme, which accounts for a lot of the new investment that companies are are required to make in each investment period. So we'll be focusing on those today. And if we could skip to the next slide, please. We'll try to go through the mechanics of the price review in not too much detail for now, but really great to hear people's questions when we get to the end of this section. So I think that the key thing to understand is we work to a 5-year investment window. So we have the price control, which is all captured in a business plan, and it's delivered over the course of what we call an AMP, an asset management period. So that's the 5-year chunk during which the business plan is delivered and implemented. But in parallel, we're always looking forward to the next one, and that's the price review. And so we're always in the process of implementing the current plan and thinking forward to the next one. So there's always plenty to keep us busy, and hopefully lots of opportunities for local authorities to get involved, but particularly looking forward to the next investment window now that we are. Rachel, I think if you click again, there's a cheap animation to show where we are. Here we go. Yeah, we're at the tail end of what we call PR24. So the price review that concludes in 2024 will give us the business plans for the following AMP8. And before the ink is dry on that, we'll be thinking forward again to PR29. So if we skip forward again, please. Really, the whole idea of the price control goes back to that crucial relationship between the companies and our customers. So, as I said, we're here to primarily deliver the utility services on behalf of customers and deliver the statutory environmental outcomes that that Dan has taken us through. In the system we have here, that the privatized system, investors put forward the money for that, which is ultimately then recouped through customers' bills. And clearly the benefit of that is if you have a lot of money to spend, it would be difficult and lumpy for customers to find all of that up front. So the system we have draws on private finance through our company's owners and investors to provide the upfront capital, and then provide a much smoother bill profile for customers to recover those costs over a much longer time frame, keeping bills a lot more manageable in the year to year as the customer sees it. And the reason we have price control is, as Dan alluded to, the sector represents something of a natural monopoly, notwithstanding the elements of competition that there are. But really, the theory is that a regulator is needed to mimic the effects of competition to make sure that the bill increases that customers face are fair. And that's really the role of Ofwat as the economic regulator, is to mimic what would otherwise be achieved through competition in a more classical kind of free market. And so the price review is the process of updating the price control every 5 years. And what that comprises is really a look again at what are the outputs that companies need to deliver. That includes their running costs, as well as new money for capital investment in new objectives, new targets which are maturing, population growth, and other effects such as climate change that we need to be resilient to. So the price review is a chance to take stock of all of that and review the costs, and therefore the allowances that the companies are given to ultimately charge their customers. And as I said, the main outputs of the price review are business plans, which capture the regulator's view of what it costs to run the businesses in a day-to-day sense, so the ongoing base expenditure, as we call it. The new money that's needed to make good on renewing infrastructure, expanding it to deal with new challenges and so on. And also the performance commitments, so the standard and the outputs that customers and the environment can expect for companies in exchange for their for the investments being made. Just to say this thing about the bill profiles, it's worth being aware that we don't recover all of the money within year, and that's why your bill looks relatively stable over time. Some money is recovered within year. A lot of it then is smeared over into the longer term, and that's how we manage to achieve that smooth bill profile that works so well for customers. And this regime, which I think it's fair to admit does invite strong views, I think, from various people, has been, I would say, a rip-roaring success in raising significant amounts of money for investment in infrastructure and reducing our environmental impact, whilst enabling growth in housing and other sectors, all of whom effectively will rely on a clean and reliable supply of water. And we think there's probably been about in the order of 200 billion raised since privatisation, which is a doubling of the rate that we saw pre-privatisation. If we could move to the next one, please, Rachel. So we've spoken about the price review, and just to give people a bit of an indication as to the level of planning, really, and analysis and assessment that goes into it. And it's really from year -1 that we start thinking about these things and taking stock of the many things that go into planning for water management. And if you imagine water as a resource, it comes from the sky or underground and ends up in the sea, and we have an interest in the entire life cycle, really, of it, from source to sea. So clearly it's right that we do some very detailed planning to make sure that the resources are there and that drainage and sewage issues can be adequately dealt with due environmental sensitivity as well. Dan, I think, has taken us through quite nicely some of the obligations and the plans and so on that we have regard to, but clearly the flood risk management plans, the river basin management plans, all of those have a key part to play. As we go from those kind of wider scale, more general drivers in statute and planning, we refine down to individual actions that are required as captured in the Water Industry National Environment Programme, the WINEP, and a parallel system to look at water resource planning as well, which again will yield the projects that are needed to make good on the assessed need for the forthcoming AMP within a context of 25-year planning horizon. So all of that yields us the business plans. And Rachel, if we could get another tacky animation with oh, there we go. Ta-da! We are at the draft determination stage. So after lots and lots of detailed analysis and hard work, we're at the point now where the proposals have been initially checked over by Ofwat, who have offered a view on whether the assessments, the needs cases, the proposed costs and allowances that go with that are in keeping with Ofwat's view of its statutory duties as well. And just to say, this planning framework, clearly there's huge synergies with the interests and the plans, in fact, of local authorities. I think it's fair to say this process, not through any individual failings, but it doesn't work that well for external stakeholders to try and influence, because there's so much of it, and this is an idealized version. I think it's fair to say in practice, things don't always run as smoothly as all this, and it'd be really interesting to explore how for future AMP cycles we can make sure that it's open for colleagues in local authorities to understand and influence. But yeah, as I say, the timescales, the metrics, and the regulations we work to are all against us. So there's a bit of work to do to try and line up the different drivers and levers that we have, but certainly worth looking at. So I think we're on to the final slide potentially, Rachel.
Yeah.
And back over to Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to give you some initial reactions to the draft determinations which came out last Thursday. And this is nearly the end of the process for this price review cycle. So between now and 28th of August, there's a consultation period that Ofwat will undertake on the draft determinations. Companies will resubmit their plans on the 28th of August. And then in December, we will get final determinations, which is Ofwat's view of what price and service incentives should be in the 2025 to 2030 period. Now, I mean, writ large, this is still a massive investment programme. So investment levels are going to be triple the rate of what they've been in 2020 to 2025. So that is massive. It's £88 billion worth of expenditure that Ofwat signed off out of a sort of 104 billion asked for by companies. So that is a massive amount of money, obviously, and will mean, unfortunately, sort of bills going up. But that is to pay for vital infrastructure improvements. So going into the detail, like Nick said, on base expenditure, which is operations and maintenance, there's been a 7% cut in what Ofwat have come back with, as opposed to what companies asked for. And on enhancement expenditure, which is probably more important for us here, you know, so that's your Nunia reservoirs, it's the reductions in nutrients, it's storm overflow improvements. There's been a 25% cut to what companies asked for versus what Ofwat have come back with. So that's quite significant. And that's gone along with stringent performance commitment levels and requirements. So Ofwat is essentially seeking more for less. So if I were to take, again, it's a hot button issue, but the subject of storm overflows, there's been a 17% cut in funding, but there's been a 20% increase in performance expectation. And just to give you an idea, so if you look at that graph I've put up on the screen on the left, if you look at the purple line, essentially the target for 2035, Ofwat have brought that forward to 2030. So we need to get to 17 spills per overflow by 2030. Now, on the surface, that might look quite attractive, but given the cuts in funding as well, we are concerned about the realism of that position. And it will mean essentially companies needing to go back to the drawing board on the sorts of projects that they are suggesting, the sorts of ways that they are going to reduce storm overflows. And we think overall that could lead to delays in the realisation of benefits and potentially changes to scope and what companies are doing. So obviously that's not welcome, and we will need as an industry to speak to Ofwat I think quite extensively over the coming weeks to understand what their rationale was for both in making those targets more stretching, but also cutting the funding to achieve them, which doesn't seem quite right to us. But I mean, I think the sort of last thing that I'd say in it is, it's this sort of simple takeaway for everyone from this, and it's irrespective of those concerns. This will be the biggest investment programme ever in the water sector, and I think there'll be quite a lot to keep planning authorities busy in terms of the schemes put forward. So we are really looking forward to working with you as a sector. I'm really looking forward to any questions you might have on the presentation. And with that, Rachel, I'll pass back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Nick. So it's now really open to questions. None have come in the Q&A as yet. So if people wish to put their hands up, has anyone got any questions on the overview that Water UK have provided? David Edwards, hi there.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for that overview. It's really helpful. Just mindful, I'm working with the Norfolk authorities on a lot of nutrient neutrality solutions, etc., and do recognise what he's saying about it's a big investment, but it's still only a portion of the demand that's been identified by the water companies, and I just wonder how the water companies are going to be able to square that off when there's regulatory sort of requirements, statutory requirements around technically achievable limits and things like that that will shape their priorities as well. Well, presumably they've got to go back and review their plans now this draft determination's been made.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And yeah, we don't have the detail up, but I happen to know off the top of my head that we saw about 1.2 billion less on the nutrients program than companies asked for. I think there's a really big question about the implications of that for delivery against, as you say, some really critical enabling investment to make sure that other parts of the economy can grow as well. I think that the thing to be slightly mindful of is the cuts are not even across everywhere, and it would be worth checking in with your specific company about where it thinks the specific allowance it's been given would bite, because it's not 10% across the board, or it's quite targeted in certain areas. So it would be worth, I think, checking in with the plans, or do come to us. We'll have some data to hand to try and understand exactly what that means in individual locales. But I think that's right, and it really highlights the point that I think the water sector, I think, will do a great job in keeping ahead of its investment and impact through this program. We can do even more if we get the allowances that we sought. There's still a huge question about other sectors and the role that they play as well. So with nutrient neutrality, it was never the case that we would fix that on our own, given that the diffuse sources in most of those catchments are far more significant. So I think it's welcome that we're seeing the ability to invest, particularly to stripping nutrients in our protected sites. I think that's great. I think that it's right to highlight that we'll need to see more from how agricultural subsidies and other issues like that are apportioned to make sure that the catchments get into a position where they can handle more economic growth as well. So we're a key part of that, but we're not the only one, and it's right that government will be looking across other sources of pollution to try and get on top of that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick, and thank you, David, for that question. Another question's come up in the Q&A just about, I suppose, some of the background investment issues and the timing of that coming forward. So I presume there's been lots of discussion with Ofwat in the past. Are you able to update on that question, please?
Yeah, and this is a question we get quite often. So thank you, Councillor Holyrood, for putting it through. I think in quite simple terms, bills have been going down in real terms. So that's once you take out the impact of inflation over the last 10 years. I mean, the reasons why, we've people have had a rush of time, haven't they? We've had a cost of living crisis. I think it's fair to say that Ofwat prioritised cheaper bills over resilient infrastructure in that time, and I don't think I'd like to make a value judgment over the wisdom of that. But it does mean that now we are playing catch up. We're playing catch up on asset maintenance. We're playing catch up on water resources and the creation thereof. We haven't had a new reservoir in this country for 30 years. That's a statistic you probably heard quite a lot over the last couple of years. Again, we are probably doing it at a time where interest rates are up. It's probably a little bit more expensive than it would have been to do it 5 or 10 years ago. But I think what's important now, crucially, is that we do get going with this work. It's not going to get any easier. So this investment is needed. It's critical. It means that we will future-proof this country's potable water supplies, and we will reduce sewage and all the other things that I've talked about. So I think it's really crucial that we get going in this period.
Great, thank you for that question. Thank you, Dan, for the answer. Are there any other questions? Does anyone else wish to put their hands up and come in with any questions? I suppose if I just had one, in terms of the challenges from as Water UK representing all of the water companies, what do you see as the biggest challenges coming forward for the investment programme that is set?
So we probably do a sort of a double-headed job on this one. So I think, frankly, volume, mobilising the supply chain. We have 2,500 improvements to storm overflows alone, projected still in 2025 to 2030. Now, assuming that the economics can be made to make sense, and that between now and draft final determinations, companies will find a way of being able to fund those improvements. Volume is going to be massive, so we're going to need to mobilise the supply chain. We're going to need contractors to work with us at scale. It will mean creative solutions potentially in those areas to make sure that there are sufficient people to do the work to deliver on the ground. And I think water companies really are gearing up on that. They need certainty as soon as possible in terms of what they will have to play with on funding and final determinations. But I think delivery on the ground, and obviously planning is a massive part of that, which is why we're so pleased to be speaking here today. Anything that we can do to expedite processes, obviously follow the correct process, make sure that we have all stakeholders bought in, but anything we can do to expedite them, I think will really help to make sure that the ambition of this plan is realised.
Great, thank you, Dan. Councillor Holroyd, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, just another question about the local councils and how it all matches up. You mentioned that there hasn't naturally been a way for local authorities to feed in to all of these plans, which is surprising and disappointing, given that it is the local councils themselves that have the legal duty through the Water Framework Directive to improve water quality within their area. So that seems a bit of a mismatch in regulatory terms, and how do we make that work so that local authorities can meet their legal duties to improve water quality in their areas?
Yep, I'd agree with the characterization. I think it's really a function of the regulations being implemented or even derived in silos from one another, and it really does make that partnership working that we all want to see that bit harder. I mean, I've given a very general picture, and I'm sure on the ground there's lots of great examples of companies working with local authorities and other stakeholders to try and get this stuff through. It could be better, I think, is the point, in that everybody has their own deadlines. We have our own drivers. A lot of the stuff that we do is done, with the regulator, rightly holding us to account for delivery, but by a certain date. And again, that does force a certain way of working. The other thing is that the the regulations are quite rigidly interpreted in terms of what you can deliver, and ideally there'll be a bit more flexibility as to how outcomes are delivered as opposed to very narrow outputs, which is how the process is biased towards right now. So I think it's fair to say that we will have a shared aspiration to make this a lot more accessible to the public, to other stakeholders as well. Certainly local authorities, as you say, given the overlap in roles and responsibilities there. So I think this is very much the start of that. We're really hoping that for PR29 we can do with government and the regulators a bit of a root and branch review of how the strategic planning framework ends up as business plans 4 years down the line, and making sure that people for whom it's not their sort of day job have a fair chance to understand what's happening and influence it as well. So just to say that there will be good work, but there's just definitely much more we can be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, given that the local authorities hold the legal, we're the ones that are held to account if the water quality is not improving, we must have levers to be able to make the water companies improve, because at the moment it seems we don't.
Great. Thank you for that question. Andrew Norton.
Hi, I'm Andy from Mansfield. Kind of linked to that to some extent. In terms of when you're planning for your infrastructure and everything else like that, how much do you actually take account of what's in the development plans of the various districts and boroughs and etc., and how much say consultation and liaison is there between yourselves and ourselves, and what can be done to improve that as well? I mean, we're in a stage of where we're very early stages of local plan production, and obviously this is going to be something that's going to be key for us in understanding all that. So it's those sorts of queries in terms of your work and plan production and linking it all together, I suppose.
Yeah, I expect this will be one of the key themes that emerges from the second lot of presentations that we have. I think this is something that's really going to come through in the. So if it's all right to defer to to our colleagues who actually implement these things for some more on that, I think that'd be a really useful talking point. Is that all right? So not to be
apologies for
you get a much better answer from those guys than from me, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Andrew. And Mark.
Hiya, thanks, Rachel. More of a comment, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. I mean, you talk about the investment programme, biggest investment ever. I hear that. But then from a planning perspective, impacts of the development, harmful impacts are mitigated or should be mitigated by the developer. I should say at this point that actually I work for North Kesteven District Council. We're the home of the Lincolnshire Reservoir, proposed Lincolnshire Reservoir. In fact, it's only 2 miles over there, so I'm quite familiar with it. Again, so you say biggest investment ever, but then you told us that, was it a 25% cut in what had been asked for in terms of the enhancement programme, such as reservoirs? So I'm really concerned here that there's a value engineering exercise that's going to be taken forward. Again, developer pays for and mitigates impacts, but then there's the investment's not there. Value engineering. I'm a bit concerned that are we going to get the environmental, social, economic mitigations that, in a sense, the promoters of the reservoir are talking about, and and one of the very positive things about the engagement with Anglian Water has been that engagement with communities, giving them assurances about the benefits of the reservoir and the environmental delivery that they're talking about. This is an embanked reservoir, so the landscape impact's quite telling. So all of those things are on the table at the moment, but there's a sort of suggestion in what you say that there might be some value engineering going on, or might need to be.
So value engineering, can you just unpack that phrase for me? It's not something I tend to.
So again, you start with a project that's worth £200 million, but you can't afford it, so you've got to make it 175 million. So you've got to cut your cloth accordingly, and it just feels that we're in danger of that. And I appreciate that customers have to pay, and I'm a customer as well. So just as I say, just doesn't. I'm a bit uncomfortable with it at the moment. That's all.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Listen, that was a sector-wide figure, that 25% cut in enhancement expenditure, and that isn't uniform across all projects. So I don't know for the project you're talking about what the specifics are. So that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is just, it is a risk. I don't think, if you do lop 10% off the cost of a project, and Ofwat have done this, and many examples in the current draft determinations, without necessarily giving us a whole lot of explanation as to why they've done it, it does create that risk. But I'm absolutely certain that companies will be arguing for efficient costs between now and when their plans go back into Ofwat in August, and B, that they will look to deliver the absolute best project that they can with the envelope that they're given. So those are the things. And again, look, we've got Jeff from Anglian speaking later today, who I'm sure will speak to it much more elegantly than I will. But those are the two things that I can say that we can guarantee.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan, can I just add that there are consumer protections as well? So anything that's not delivered isn't charged for. I think that's the thing to bear in mind wherever we get to. That the tragedy would be anything that doesn't go forward is needed for the original reason it was put in the plan, for environmental reasons or whatever else it is. So that would be a shame on that basis. But consumers will not be paying for anything that isn't ultimately delivered. If that was what's driving some of your question there.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Dan and Nick, for that question. Has anyone got any other questions that would be useful to cover at this stage, or shall we move on to some of the discussions coming forward from the water companies? Then perhaps we can pick up some wider issues after that. Does that sound like a good way forward? Okay, brilliant. Right, well, I will move on the slides, hopefully. Oh, that was the discussion. Great, excellent. Right, so I will move over to Severn Trent. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for that. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Gareth Smith. I'm Severn Trent's Town Planning Manager. You all have to bear with me this afternoon. I'm struggling a little bit with COVID, so I'll do my best. If it's not very good, you can blame it on COVID, but I'll try and make it as interesting as possible. So I've been doing this role kind of at Severn Trent now for about 15 years. So I'm pretty experienced in the challenges we have in delivering waste and water infrastructure. So I'll talk through some of those challenges with you today. Just very quickly, we have a supply chain that does our planning work for us. So they submit planning applications and various other applications to get the consents and permissions that we need. I'm part of a kind of expert client unit at Severn Trent that manages all of that activity. Okay, next slide, please, Rachel. And the next one. Thanks, Rachel. Right, it's quite a busy slide, this, everybody, but I'll try and bring it to life without kind of reading it verbatim. I just want to stress before I get into this that I'm talking here about various challenges that we face, but I want to be very honest with you all that we absolutely know that there are things that we do and don't do as an applicant, as a developer, that we need to improve on. So we absolutely face into that. We have issues with the quality and consistency of some of the submissions that we put in, which lead to issues and planning delays. So I'm absolutely aware of that, and we are striving to improve ourselves. I just want to talk through on this slide just some of the challenges that we do face. Some will be very familiar to people, some may not be, but hopefully it's of interest, and we can have a discussion on it later on. So the headline at the top there basically gives you a kind of quick summary of how we feel about planning at the moment. So it does feel increasingly challenging. We're in a system that's becoming more onerous for applicants. And local authorities, I'm sure there'll be lots of you nodding at this, do continue to struggle for resources, skills, and investment. We experience lots of different kinds of delays with validation processes, responses from consultees, reconsultations with consultees, and delay. All this kind of stuff that I say we're very familiar to people on the call. I'll talk through this summary of issues that I've put on the list. So LPA resource shortages. Now, I know it's a really difficult market out there to recruit. And again, I'm sure lots of you will be nodding at this, that it's a really difficult marketplace. We've experienced it ourselves. It's just really hard to get planners and really hard to get really good ones in. And that obviously leads to increased challenges for everybody. So ourselves as applicants and you guys as local authorities with caseloads. So we're very sympathetic to that. We understand the challenges. It is what it is at the moment, but hopefully, more investment will come. Where the people will come from, I'm not sure how long it will take, but we do need more investment in that resource. Again, the same applies to skills. There's huge, not to say this, but there's huge skills across all local authorities. But as with the resource issue, there's going to be challenges in some skill areas. So I've mentioned there EIA and BNG. BNG is very new to everybody, so that's no surprise. But obviously, the lack of skill sometimes does cause delay, unintended consequences. So that's a bit of a challenge for us. The third one is not a massive issue. It can be dealt with quite swiftly, but I just wanted to put it in there. We've had some recent experience with some really quite frustrating kind of committee referral protocols. There's one example recently of something having to go to committee, everything was fine, but one local person didn't like it, so it went to committee, which takes up a lot of time for everybody, the local authority, more than anybody else, and just creates a bit of frustration and delay for us. Statutory consultee delays, again, I know they have lots to look at. I think we'll all get frustrated, but there is lots of delay with statutory consultee responses. We've experienced a lot of it recently. Often leads to multiple revisions of documents, multiple consultation periods. Before you know it, you've got a lot of delay on a planning application. I'm stating the obvious to lots of you here. You all have experienced this, I'm sure. Next is what I've called 11th hour responses. Responses from pretty key consultees, very late in the determination period. You chase them, officers have chased them, nothing's come in, and all of a sudden something comes in and it's quite problematic. That's a real frustration. I know these things happen, but it's frustrating for everybody, particularly the applicant, who has to deal with that, and it can obviously lead to more delay. Validation challenges, I'm not going to kind of dwell on this. There's inconsistency and delays to process. Again, I mentioned at the start, sometimes we don't get it right. We have to face into that. But there's inconsistency across the piece with validation challenges, which leads to delay. Biodiversity net gain, BNG, obviously an enormous issue for all of us. We're all kind of still wrestling with it, trying to understand it, getting experience with it. It's a new system. We are learning. Again, it creates delay and some uncertainty. I think it's a great thing, but it's a difficult thing, a challenging thing. And, again, it plays into the whole resource and skills piece. Lack of focus on project benefits. We've kind of touched on this already this afternoon, but it's a particular, I'll be honest, frustration of mine. I think often when applications go in, the environmental benefits of what we're trying to achieve, they sometimes get lost amidst the focus on other issues. So often, we're trying to, put something in that's going to reduce, that's going to stop spills to river, it's going to maybe take phosphates out of what goes into the river, whatever else it might be. Often you can feel that's not really being recognised, and we end up spending too much time on arguable issues that actually are not that important and can seem quite trivial in comparison. Sometimes you have to focus on obviously big issues, but sometimes you can feel like we're focusing on trivial issues and the actual huge benefit of the scheme is not really recognised. Constraints of existing PD rights. Some of you will think they've got great PD rights. Where are the constraints? And we have got very good PD rights. They're extensive. They enable us to do an awful lot of work, deliver a lot of investment. So our PD rights are really good, really strong. Obviously, sometimes we have to spend time justifying the use of those PD rights. But I've put there's probably more, I think, an opportunity, I think, with a challenge that's coming between 2025, 2030 with AMP8. It's maybe, time is now right to look at improved PD rights, especially on work associated with, river quality work, reducing spills. I think there's a real opportunity here to improve our PD rights, free up the planning system, and just deliver lots of really key interventions to reduce spills to rivers, which don't really need to go through the planning process. EIA, I've kind of mentioned this already, but a lack of understanding of the regs and the process can lead to significant delays in screening opinions. You're probably all thinking this is coming from recent experience, Gareth, and it is. A very frustrating recent experience on this where we lost months, ended up having to go to the Secretary of State for a direction on something that should never have got to that place. We spend an awful lot of money. The other companies on the call as well certainly do the same thing. We spend a lot of money screening out the need for environmental impact assessment by doing lots of survey work and looking to mitigate impact. When we do that process and we get significant delay in that process, it can be very frustrating, as you might imagine. Next slide, please, Rachel. Next one. Thank you. So again, we've touched on this already, but I'm just going to kind of be a little bit repetitive. But this is an enormous time in the history of water companies. I would say this is a massive step change in investment. It's a huge investment we're looking at, particularly from a Severn Trent point of view. This is a massive investment. We're looking to deliver it in AMP8. The draft determination that was mentioned last week, we did okay with it. We did very well actually. Our plan was commended as being outstanding, but we have had a challenge on the amount of it. So we're going to be going back and challenging that to try and get as much of it as we can to deliver the investment we think is needed for our customers and indeed the environment. This investment's so big, there's going to be a significant amount of planning activity across this programme. And I'll just talk you through some of the highlights. Top of the list, no surprise, is reducing spills to river. I've just talked about the need for maybe PD rights to enable us to do that quicker and more efficiently. This is a huge thing, right, in the industry. We're all aware of it, and I promise you all this. Few people in the country are more passionate about this than actually people in the water companies themselves. We hate it. We want to stop it. Certainly at Severn Trent, we've got an aim to be the industry leader in this. We want to be the outlier. And we want to basically lead the game in this. This is a massive thing. Now, reducing spills to river, there's lots of different ways you can do this, lots of different interventions, and you'll see lots of different interventions. Some will need planning, hopefully some will be PD, or lots will be PD. But, it can range from very simple storm tank provision to doing clever things in catchments, suds, that kind of thing, separating flows out. There's lots of different things you can do, lots of different solutions. Improving river quality, again, this is about, sewage treatment works and what comes out of them in final effluent and removing phosphates. So quite a lot of challenge on that and investments. That'll be across the piece for all water companies, but that's a big piece for us. River quality monitors, I've put that in there really. They sound quite minor. They are minor really. That's kind of the point. They're really important, but, hundreds and hundreds of river quality monitors probably across the country. Does that really need to be... They need to be things that the planning system needs to really control. Probably not. So there's no real clear PD right to deliver those. Nature-based treatment solutions like wetlands. So again, massive environmental benefits of these. Nature-based treatment solutions is biodiversity net gain benefits, all kinds of benefits with that. Takes chemicals out of the process, takes carbon out of the process. It's kind of win-win-win. So fantastic. But again, question marks about some of these solutions. Will they need planning? Will they not need planning? Is it PD? Kind of stuff. SUDS, I mentioned it already, but upstream interventions to separate flows and reduce flooding and spills. I know Andrew's already spoken from Mansfield. Andrew will be aware that we've used Mansfield as an opportunity area to invest, I think, over 70, maybe 80 million pounds this AMP on sustainable drainage in Mansfield. Not only to green up some of the middle of Mansfield, but also to reduce flooding, but to separate flows into our sewers, and that's been really successful. There's been some planning activity on that. That's all been really good, and just big thumbs up and thanks to Mansfield. It's been a really great process with them. So thank you, Andrew, and your team for that. We've also got, as you'd expect, significant investment across multiple sewage works planned. We always have, to improve capacity, accommodate growth, to deal with flows better, to modernise works. Lots of our works need investment. As all water companies will find, some of them need some TLC and investment after not having it for maybe some time. And there's permit compliance and net zero ambitions. So we are on the road. I don't think we've got there quite yet, but we've got an aspiration. I think we're going to achieve it to deliver the first net zero sewage treatment works actually in Stoke, a place called Strongford. I'm looking to roll that out across a number of other sewage treatment works across AMP8. Then we've got water resource pipelines. We've talked about the growth challenges and resilience. So water resource pipelines, new treatment assets at waterworks, water resilience pipelines, again, new assets, and indeed improved security at sites. So again, there's question marks sometimes about improved security, CCTV fencing, that kind of stuff that probably doesn't really need to go through the planning process, but sometimes does. Again, question mark about need for improved PD rights. Thanks, Rachel. Could you move on for me? Thank you. And again, thanks, Rachel. Okay. Apologies if I'm rattling on here, but I hope it's interesting to people. So this final slide I've got is, what would improve the delivery, and the headline really at the top there just says, it'd be much better, I think, for everybody if we spend time, resource, and energy in the applications and the developments that really, should go through the planning process, where we need to get everything right and do all the mitigation right and actually put high quality applications in. For the industry and for Severn Trent to have any chance of delivering on AMP8, I think we're going to have to see some kind of improvement to our PD rights. Otherwise, we risk, I think, crashing crashing a planning system that's already kind of creaking a little bit. Putting hundreds and hundreds of planning applications in for minor interventions, I don't think is what any of us kind of want or need. So there's some of the opportunities I've put there. I'm going to rattle through those just to try and bring them to life. Talked about increased resources at LPAs. Multiple governments and administrations have promised this. Hopefully it will come under Labour. They've said the right things so far. Hopefully they'll follow through. Again, same applies to investment in skills. Improved response times from statutory consultees. Sorry to labour the point, but in practice, it can be really difficult, this process, and it can just delay delivery of lots of projects and planning permissions. Planning performance agreements. We've used these very rarely, not because we don't want to, but whenever we kind of table them, I think they're difficult things to put in place with local authorities for various reasons. Again, they're difficult for both sides. What are they? What's the content of them? How long will it take to put together, etc., etc. But I think we need to look at doing those more across the piece. I talked about improved PD rights. So, quick example there, just I've already mentioned, but river quality monitors. Larger kiosk operational sites got rights to do large kiosks already, but there's lots of examples where we're still getting permission for, a kiosk at the back of a sewage works. No one knows it's there. No one's going to see it. No one's going to be affected by it. But it's over the PD threshold. It technically needs planning permission. But not something we should be seeking planning permission for. I talked about nature-based solutions. Some clarity on what is PD, what isn't, would help. Talked about CSO work, combined sewer overflows. So combined sewer overflows are essentially kind of the assets we're talking about when we look at reducing spills to rivers. Talked about committee protocols, so kind of maybe a consistent, if it's possible, and local politics being what it is, a more sensible, consistent approach to what does go and doesn't go to committee. Some clarity on EIA and EORs, the future, where's that going? Labour going to follow through on the EOR stuff or not? Question mark. And again, I put improved simplifying of BNG guidance. I know it's very early days, but I think already we could probably all do with a bit more guidance and some simplifying of that process. That was all I was going to say, Rachel. I hope that's okay for everybody and people have found it useful, and I'll obviously deal with any questions that come subsequently.
Great, thank you, Gareth, and thank you for coming when you're so poorly. So appreciate that. Yeah,
pleasure, no problem.
We'll get well soon. We will do the questions at the end, so we'll move now on to Wessex Water, and Emma Baker is joining us to go through Wessex Water's work. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Gareth, because I saw Gareth's slides and we've avoided a repeat. So I could say ditto to everything Gareth said on issues, delivery and opportunities, but I won't. I'm going to try and bring some of what Gareth said to life with some case studies that are live at the moment. So I'll just pause for a couple of minutes and tell you about my role, because it's a new role at Wessex Water. So I am the Partnership Stakeholder Director, focusing on engagement with our local planning authorities, Natural England and the Environment Agency, entirely around the AMP8 programme. Due to the scale and complexity of the programme, this post was felt to be needed to stand a fighting chance of getting those things up and running. And I'm quite new to Wessex Water, so I joined in March, having done 25 years at the Environment Agency and Natural England or English Nature. So a step across for me as well. I'll also be, and we have already been doing, and I can see from some of the names on the call, one of the things we've been doing is an initial engagement with each of the local planning authorities, either CEO or Executive Director of Place, and then we've been going on to run a workshop with the heads of planning service, planning officers, etc. Really trying to think about how can we work better together, how can we improve our ways of working in that PD space, the EIA space. How can we tell the story better when we do submit planning applications? And then we've had a really good conversation at all of these workshops where we recognise, you know, the shortage of resource and skills that Gareth spoke about. You know, and we're really, really keen. We are offering stakeholder funding. You know, is that a bespoke PPA? And I've got a slide on that. So I just thought it was worth setting the scene about the role and what we're actually doing in Wessex Water with our local planning authority. So if you could move me on a slide, Rachel. Cool, thank you. So a bit of a summary. Again, you know, major change. We've talked about this. We were proposing a doubling of our investment up to 3.5 billion. As it says there, subject to draft and final determination. We've had that, and it is fair to say we've had somewhat of a haircut in some key areas for us, primarily in that nutrient reduction and the asset resilience space, which is disappointing at the moment, but we are up for the challenge and looking to move ahead over the coming weeks with Ofwat. So I think it's also fair to say we have a significant number of projects. We've got 300 projects. We think about a half of those to a third to a half are definitely going to require planning permission. Of that group, some of them are going to require possible EIA screening. And in that group, everything that requires planning permission obviously requires a BNG commitment from us. And I've got a couple of case studies to bring BNG to life. So Gareth, thank you for your comment on improving and simplifying BNG. That's the message coming out here as well. The other issue we have in Wessex Water's patch, this is highly sensitive locations. So we've got the highest proportion of designated sites with the Somerset Levels Moors, Poole Harbour, the catchment for Poole Harbour and the Hampshire Avon. And then also quite often, by the very nature of our work, we're also trying to work in floodplains. And quite often what we're trying to do is quite unsightly as well. You know, it doesn't look nice either. So we need to remember that piece of context. We have been really keen to make as much progress as possible in nature-based solutions and wetlands. And we've been doing lots and lots of catchment permitting and catchment delivery schemes. And in fact, at the moment in the plan, we've got over 30 nature-based solutions or wetlands proposed at the 150 storm overflow locations that we're going to be working at. The thing I would say at the moment, though, is that's a little bit up in the air. DEFRA and other regulators are saying that they need certainty and consistency to permit these nature-based solutions, particularly in designated sites where we're needing to do HRA assessments as well for NE. So while the local planning authorities have been really grateful of that nature-based solutions wetlands approach, the blue and green infrastructure, the benefit for the public and society in terms of mental health and well-being. It's actually quite difficult in the regulator space at the moment there. So we should watch this space with interest. If you just move us on, Rachel. So rather than repeat Gareth's slides, because I had the courtesy of seeing them beforehand, I thought I'd try and bring to life with a couple of examples. So we know that we need to do lots of land acquisition. That's either for operational needs or for our BNG commitments. Some of our BNG we can't do on site, so then we'll be looking at credits or habitat banks. And we are looking at a number of habitat banks across Wessex. So one of the things we've been doing quite recently as well is looking at partnerships. So who could manage these habitat banks for us, who is in the business of managing for BNG. And we've just done a series of visits around all of the wildlife trusts in our patch, National Trust and Wetlands and Wildlife Trust, to again see, you know, what are they up for, what can they do, how can they help us, how can this be a partnership. So a couple of real life examples. My team tell me we are one of the first going to statutory credits for watercourses. So this is at a site called Hullstock in Dorset. It's currently an AMP8 scheme where we are trying to get planning permission. As part of the planning permission, we need BNG. This is because we are working within 10 metres of the watercourse. So we're 9 metres away with a concrete curb, 17 metres of it, and it's required. We can't do it on site because of everything else on site and around us on site. So we are currently scouring the nation. We're currently looking all around England for statutory watercourse credits, but of the right order for the watercourses. So I would say about BNG, not only does it need to be improved and simplified, but the watercourses specifically needs lots of attention. It's going to be incredibly difficult for all of us to get the watercourse credits we might need. We know the credits, the types of credits we're going to need are watercourses, hedgerows and coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. We suspect we will be able to get hedgerows and floodplain grazing marsh. We believe we're going to really struggle in the watercourses, the right level of watercourses space. The diagram on the right-hand side is a constructed wetland that we are hoping to build. This is in Somerset at a village called Shapwick. Next door, so we're surrounded by Natural England land, Hawke and Owl Trust land. We've bought this land. It's just come out of maize production. This is the wetland we are proposing. But given the BNG situation, because we've got the kind of Somerset Levels and Moors ditches and reens around the edge of this, they are not good quality ditches and reens. They're very trapezoidal internal drainage board channels. It is likely we might need to change this. So rather than having that whole entire area as a functioning wetland, we might need to shrink it completely to get away from the watercourses. And then is it a viable wetland? Or, and there's some hope in this, we are looking to use the Rule 4 exemption. So we are then exempt from needing to do BNG credits because the wetland itself will create huge biodiversity net gain. We've got some traction and support for this from Natural England. We're working this through with Somerset Council. We're also working this through with DEFRA. It's a bit of both of these are a bit of a test case, as I understand from the team. So first statutory watercourse credits, potentially, possibly the first use of Rule 4 as well, certainly that we're aware of at the moment. We've also butted into, so our partner, Hawke and Owl Trust, will take on the management of this site for us, and we therefore need them to be able to get higher level stewardship or HLS. And again, we're butting into some issues there. Both of them need Section 106 agreements with the local planning authorities. So therefore, both legal teams need to be involved. That's Somerset and Dorset for these two, with ourselves. And again, you know, that's costly, that's timely, that's needing legal resource, both ours and at the local planning authority. So some quite tough, real live negotiations going on in that BNG space. And I have to say, anybody on the call from Dorset or Somerset, you know, our teams are working really well together at the forefront of something that's really difficult. So we are very grateful. I know I've seen a couple of names, certainly somebody from Somerset, certainly somebody from Wiltshire on the call in our patch. We just move on one. The last thing I was going to talk about was stakeholder resource funding. So alongside the company developing its BNG strategy, hence knowing that for the last slide, we've also developed a bit of a stakeholder resource funding position, because we absolutely know that timely delivery is about working together and partners and partnership. And much of what we want to do, actually, the local planning authorities would want us to do as well. We know that from the workshops and the conversations. So we've been talking about stakeholder resource funding. We've been talking about whether that is whole posts, whole people, funded for AMP8 and AMP9. We've been talking about whether that's arms and legs of statutory consultees. We've been talking about whether that's a performance planning agreement, a service level agreement, or funded posts. I spoke at the start about these planning workshops we're offering, so a tailored session to each of the local planning authorities, showing them what we think our programme of work will be in their local planning authority area, giving them examples of the work, telling them and showing them what we do internally with our environment and planning team and our ecologists and how we develop our planning applications. We're sharing draft detailed programmes, and we're trying to develop ways of working with the local planning authorities, NE and EA. We had a really good workshop with NE, not last week, the week before, because we've got so many designated space, the whole HRA piece, protected species piece, statutory consultee on planning piece is going to be really important to us, and we need timely and focused NE engagement. So again, we are looking to enter into probably a DAS agreement and a service level agreement with them. And I guess a bit of a shout out to anyone on the call. If anyone on the call has experience of having bespoke PPAs at a programme level, at a local planning authority level, ready for AMP8, you know, given the scale and complexity of what we've got, then we're all ears and we'd love a conversation, because that is where we'd like to get to, a bespoke PPA for each of our local planning authorities, or certainly Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire, where the vast majority of our programme is going to fall. Thank you, Rachel. I put any questions, but I understand now we're going to take questions after all 4 companies have spoken, Rachel. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Emma. Yes, and we'll have questions at the end, but thank you. It's useful to have some live examples. Okay. United Utilities, I think that Dave is joining us.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm Dave Watson, Head of Planning at United Utilities. So I've been around twice as long as Gareth. These 15 years is my 30 years. Since we were called North West Water, so we are the water company for the northwest of England, from Crewe down in Cheshire up to the Scottish borders, so covering the counties of Cumbria, Lancashire, Cheshire, Merseyside, Greater Manchester, bits and bobs around the periphery of Yorkshire, Derbyshire, Staffordshire and Shropshire, but yeah, the northwest of England, over 7 million customers. I was going to touch on some of the AMP8 stuff, and then just a couple of case studies at the end around some of our big linear pipeline projects that we've just got through the planning system. So just some explanation around the innovative ways of working to get those through, really. But yeah, next slide, please, Rachel. So these are pre-draft determination numbers, but you know, massive investment programs. Everybody else has talked about, you know, 13.7 billion pounds was proposed. I think it's come out around 12 billion after the draft determination. But, you know, 7-fold increase still in the environmental programme. So largely it is a wastewater programme, you know, big investment in spill reduction, 60% spill reduction from where we are now. That's around 454, I think, interventions at CSOs, and improvements of 500 kilometres of rivers, nutrient removal and that sort of thing. And on the water side, looking at hardening the chance of a hosepipe ban and safeguarding some water supplies. So yeah, a massive increase in the programme. Next slide, Rachel. Yeah, I'm not sure we all needed the picture of a foul sewer, but we've talked about a lot about CSOs already, which are combined sewers that overflows, and I suppose one of the main things a planning system can do to help is stop surface water getting into combined systems. You know, and obviously new housing development now on separate systems, but we do have a massive legacy of combined sewers in the northwest, and it is, you know, largely like across the country. So foul sewers, big and surface water sewers flow into combined sewers. Then when it rains, they are designed to spill, and when they spill, you get a picture like on the right hand side there. So you know, obviously the press coverage, Fergal Sharkies of the world, you know, the world is now a different place. You know, a massive requirement in investment. You know, this is no longer acceptable in the modern day, so we need to do something about it. I think that's recognised by the industry, but to do that, it's going to take time, effort, and a lot of money, and big demands on lots of resources in various sectors. Next slide, please. There are some pictures as well. But yeah, just obviously, nice picture of Deansgate there in Manchester in the rain. Probably looking out the window, it's probably doing that today. But yeah, more rain, climate change, more expectation from people around what they want from from watercourses. So you know, we need to do something about it. I think that message is loud and clear. Next one, please. So this is just, I suppose, what a typical solution for a CSO looks like. These are what we call grey solutions. These are traditional pouring concrete, old-fashioned way, underground tanks, store the wastewater, the combined storm and foul sewage in a storm tank. Rather than it spilling into the watercourse, the storm then disappears and abates. The capacity is back in the system. You can then empty the tank into the sewers and back to the treatment works, so there's no spill to the watercourse. So that's the good old-fashioned way of doing it. These are covered under our permitted development rights, so it's underground stuff. It's covered under our Section 159 powers to lay underground assets as well from access to land perspective, so we don't need to buy land. It makes the land negotiations a lot easier. So our PD rights, our access to land rights are based on old-fashioned pouring concrete engineering solutions. These examples here are in car parks, obviously industrial areas. They are often in school playing fields, public open space, parks, interfacing with sports pitches. We've got one in the middle of Ambleside in the Lake District, the Glebe at Bowness at the side of Windermere. It's got big storm tanks in it and needs more in it. The big car parks in Blackpool, if anyone's been to Blackpool, are two of our biggest storm tanks. You know, 2 years of construction, when that car park was out of action. During construction, they can have big impacts, even though they are permitted development by and large. But yeah, big construction in urban areas, but also in a smaller scale in rural Cumbria, rural Cheshire. So lots of different environments impacted. And the next slide, I think, Rachel, is just the above ground infrastructure sort of associated with those. So a kiosk there, the control cabinet. Our PD rights will cover that up to 29 metres cubed in volume. I'm not going to be measuring stick out to measure that one, but yeah, it's okay in an urban environment. But you know, we've got someone's highly dressed up in Windermere, you know, in terms of they don't look anything like that. They're not green GRP, but you know, they can look better than that when they need to be. So it's largely the above ground kiosks, if they're above 29 cube, that need approval. Vent stacks, we haven't got any PD rights of vent stacks, so those chimneys there would need approval, and access to the highway, classified roads, often another element that would need approval. So yeah, but they look at, you know, that's the context of an urban environment. The same thing in a rural area, in a school, in a public open space, you know, potentially a different thing. Would have to look slightly different. And the next slide. Just think, Gareth touched on it. There are, you know, ways and means, not just around treating it at the CSO. You know, if you can capture the rainwater in the uplands, leaky dams, natural flood management, that's another way of doing it. Intercept it as high as you can. We can disconnect surface water sewers from the system to stop them being connected into the combined sewer in the first place. Obviously, but you know, issues there around water quality, and does that increase flooding if we are making that direct connection to water courses? And then some of the green solutions in terms of attenuation there, in terms of wetland creation and suds. And on the right hand side, reuse, very simple example there of a water put a house, but where any means possible of keeping rainwater out of the sewers and then stopping those spills or reducing those spills. And the next slide, Rachel, I think gives you some examples of, not sure if this is Mansfield, but everybody keeps talking about Mansfield when our engineers talk about Mansfield as well. In terms of actually putting suds in the highway, improving the street scene, but also bringing in some rainwater retention into those streets. Anything above ground there, we don't have permitted development rights for. We don't have permitted rights for suds, for ponds, for swales, for wetlands. Underground stuff, fine, but we don't want to build that anymore. We want to do this good stuff, and that's not currently covered by our PD rights. So the legislation is currently steering us towards doing things underground and the traditional way, whereas there's a want and a desire, I think, across the industry to do better than that, and to improve what we do and to do more innovative things. But the legislation and the planning system needs to catch up with that. If that's what a modern day water company should be doing, then the rights need to reflect that, I suppose. So some work to do on that, I think. Next one, Rachel, please. Yeah, and then just on to the wider programme. So it's not just all about spills. This big headline grabber is spill, spill, spills, as our CEO keeps saying. There are some watering works on the right hand side there, watering works to extend and improve reservoirs. Number 5 there, new spillway coming down on the reservoirs there. Diversions, water mains, rehab, leakage reduction. Don't really touch on the planning system the same, but on the top left there, wastewater treatment schemes, a big programme as well on the wastewater side of the actual treatment works. This is Davium, our largest works. It discharges the Ship Canal. There's £250 million to spend there. This next AMP, Salford and Eccles, also discharging the Ship Canal. Similar sort of vein, Wigan, Southport, lots of little works in Cumbria around phosphorus removal and nutrient neutrality. So, yeah, a big scheme of the non-infrastructure stuff, which is the above ground extensions to works. Hopefully, by and large, on our operational land, but some of them will need extending onto land, land adjacent or indeed elsewhere in some cases. So, and that's where EIA regs come in and that sort of thing, really. So, yeah, so lots to do. And the next slide, and the next one, I think, just takes us on to the schemes that we've recently pushed through the planning system. I suppose this is our biggest scheme. So this is over £1 billion in its own right. We've currently got 2 big pipelines from Cumbria down towards Manchester that bring water down from the Lake District. The Haweswater Aqueduct, which is this one here, is 110 kilometres long. The red bits are tunnelled, so tunnelled through the hills. The amber bits are pipes at ground level, buried pipes in a more traditional sense. But those tunnel sections have been inspected and are in a state of disrepair and will fail if we don't do something about it. So those tunnel sections there you see in red are all being replaced. So we need to lay another tunnel as close as we can to those existing ones, plug into the existing Haweswater Aqueduct. And it's a programme that's going to take us about 10 years to build. Tender just about complete just before Christmas, into contract award next year, start construction the year after. It's in the National Park in the Yorkshire Dales. It's in the Forest of Bowland. National Landscape now was AONB. Big tunnels, big machinery for 3 years in places that aren't designed for that. Clearly, the highway network's not designed for that. These are very nice, sensitive parts of the world that we are turning into almost mining operations for a period of time while the tunneling goes on. So that's been 18 months, 2 years going through the planning system. From COVID times, COVID had a big impact on the public exhibitions and the consultation around that. So yeah, it's now all approved on our applications across the 7 local authorities. We established the working groups. As you see there, there's a natural cluster of the north, the south and the central section. Got the stakeholders together in a room on a regular basis, set up PPAs, funded planning officers in a couple of local authorities that were struggling, funded specialist advice, ecology, landscape, noise, wherever we needed to. We did find a nice hole in the ground in the middle of the AONB, which is an old quarry that we've done a deal to refill, if you like, or to partly refill in a enhanced restoration scheme. So that keeps a lot of the material off the road and going through the villages. So that was an opportunity we would have struggled without, I suppose, really. In Hyndburn, in the middle of Huncourt, near Accrington, the tunnel shaft location is on some football pitches where Huncourt United play. So we're having to relocate them temporarily and submit plan applications for replacement pitches. We did BNG before. This was before BNG was in place, but because it's such an exemplar project and such a big project that we treated BNG as though it was in place. So, but slightly more flexibility than there is now, which was helpful because so we've been able to do some deals in inverted commas with the local authorities and commuted sums by and large to for them to spend on their land, without the current the regime of needing registered sites for offsetting and stuff. So we're ahead of the game on that one. And then the biggest issue has been traffic. So we have got a highways agreement. It's alongside the plan applications, the 106s, which is around making sure there's no damage to those highways. The roads that aren't designed for these vehicles, we're needing to make sure they're in a fit state, and we leave them as we find them, and repair them as we go. And we're funding a highways officer for the duration of the project. We're funding a community liaison officer for the duration of the project in the Bowland Fells, where a lot of the issues are with the rural communities. So yeah, lots going on that, and yeah, there'll be lots of work for planners during the construction process as well as the design and consenting area as well. And the next one, Rachel, is just our previous schemes. This was consented in 2017, I think, but there's 100 kilometres of pipe here on this map. The large purplish pipe links West Cumbria, Cockermouth, Workington into Failmere Reservoir. So we had to stop abstraction at Ennerdale due to Natural England taking our abstraction licence off us from environmental impacts. So 30 kilometres of pipe straight from the middle of the Lake District, build a new treatment works in the nearest available field once you leave the Lake District, and then feed into Carlisle and into Workington. So obviously a very sensitive site in the Lake District, largely following the line of an SAC watercourse, so lots of HABs regs and stuff to do in Natural England. So again, the next slide, Rachel, is into the successful delivery of that one. We have set what we call a steering group approach with the local authorities, Natural England, the air, highways, all together in a room on a regular basis, not just during the design phase, but into construction as well, and into the reinstatement phase. The National Electric National Park employed a project manager for us, and they coordinated things across the three local authorities, Natural England, the air. That was a really big help. So we funded that through a PPA. The construction detail, which is where most of the impacts are, wasn't available really at the time of the application of the IA, because it's, you're waiting for the contractor and their actual working methods to come on board. So the conditions were worded to allow that real detail to come through prior to commencement, and prior to commencement on a phase basis, because you've got 100 kilometres of pipe, you don't know how you're going to build 100 kilometres of pipe day one. It's phase by phase. So again, that was built into the conditions. And then we end up with field by field detail for reinstatement plans, for drainage, for the real construction techniques. So a very collaborative way of working throughout design and construction. And that project just won some awards with the RTPI in the Northwest that we just submitted after the reinstatement stage. Then just touching on AMP8 progress, and I think my colleague at Wessex touched on some of this as well in terms of the importance of Natural England to us. And we have got a DAS Plus set up with Natural England, are doing programme level reviews on a regular basis for Natural England, filtering out the projects that they really need to focus on, and then having deeper dives into that And we are doing similar with the EA as well. Just had a meeting with the EA this morning, trying to get a programme-wide relationship going with the EA and the Staffordshire and and Natural England, because they are so important to us. And similar to Wessex, been around the LPAs, doing the briefing sessions, raising awareness of what's coming, if you like. Exploring programme level PPAs, again, sounds familiar. And we've actually had one for a while with Bolton for AMP7. We've got 4 or 5 schemes in Bolton and managed to cover that with a PPA to do that. The National Park, the Leinster National Park, I've actually got quite an innovative sort of PPA. It's slightly less than a PPA, but it does the same thing, avoiding some of the legal bureaucracy, really. So that's been quite effective. And I suppose a biggie for us is effective pre-application and pre-application engagement, and bespoke if we can. Say, like, can we have half an hour on Teams? Can we have an hour on Teams? You don't need to regurgitate planning policy. We know it's in the green belt. We know it's this. But we want to speak to your highways people, your ecologists, your landscapers, your archaeologists. Can we get your team together as a local authority on a regular basis? And it's not necessarily about written words. It's more about meetings and conversations and doing it that way, really. So yeah, bespoke pre-apps as well is probably a really critical part of it as well. And I think that is it.
Great, thank you very much, Dave. That's great to have that update. I think we have now got Anglian Water. I think Jeff's going to share his slides, so hopefully he's able to do that. So welcome.
Hi, yeah, good afternoon. Rachel, can you see those slides okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, it's going to be a little bit of a rattle through because we're going to try and finish by around 1:45, so that there's time for some questions. But these slides will be available afterwards. So I'm going to give a slightly different but complementary view that you've heard so far. My role at AEW is to look after our supply demand strategy and our supply demand balance. So I'm coming at this very much from a kind of water resources angle, in contrast to some of the other presentations that we've heard, and more a strategic view focused on kind of water resources planning, which is my background, rather than, say, town and country planning. So what I'm going to cover, some of the challenges that we've got for water resources, a focus on the issues around water provision for non-domestic use, some of the new infrastructure solutions before wrapping up. So water resources is a real challenging issue for us as a company and for the East of England more generally. What you have on the left-hand side is what we call our regional supply-demand balance. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you will see that the purple line starts to dip below the dotted blue line and the grey line, the latter representing demand, the purple line representing supply. So effectively, if we do nothing, we're going to end up with a very large deficit in supplies in not too far into the future. And on the right-hand side, those two buckets just explain the size of the deficits, but also the reason why we're facing into a deficit in the future. The biggest reason for that is the need to leave more water in the environment under licence capping, so to avoid risk of deterioration under the Water Framework Directive, and in the longer term, environmental destination. But there's also work that we need to do to improve the resilience to drought, to adapt to climate change, and to manage growth in what is the fastest growing region of the UK. And that was the regional view, but the local view is similar. So this is looking at all of the water resource planning zones that we have across our region. You can see that the sort of deficits, the impacts that we're going to have are fairly ubiquitous. 2 of those 3 blue areas, which balance to zero, only do so because they rely on imports and don't actually have any resources of their own. And if this was a true regional map, you'd see Cambridge Water and Essex and Suffolk Water's position being pretty similar to our own. So it's an East of England issue more generally. So how are we going to meet these challenges? We've got a 3-pronged approach, follows the sustainability hierarchy. So first, to make best use of existing resources, including demand management. Second, to develop new strategic water resource options, which is really around 2 new reservoirs. And third is to look at what we call our adaptive future resources, so things like desalination. And I'll go on to explain these in a little bit more. But they're the schemes that we need essentially to rebalance the buckets as we move out to 2050. So starting with the first one, we've got a major scheme at the moment, 380 kilometres of transfers that are being laid, particularly that big spine that goes from the north part of Lincolnshire, so nearly the Humber Estuary, all the way down to Essex via Cambridgeshire and Suffolk. And that pipeline wasn't eligible for a DCO, so it required 14 different local planning permissions, which has obviously added to its complexity. I think around 100 archaeological digs across that area, so quite challenging both for ourselves but also for local planning authorities to kind of get their head around that and provide the resources for it. But we're also looking at how we can use the water that we have better. So looking at efficiency on treatment plants, for example, and also reusing water. So actually taking effluent before it's discharged to sea, final effluent, polishing it up even more, putting it into a reservoir, for example, for eventual kind of reuse. This is fairly standard overseas, but is fairly new to the UK. And what we're trying to do with this interconnectivity, and you can see we're trying to extend that in future, is to mirror the resilience work that we've done in the southwest of our region, which is already very well connected, and is why you can't see new interconnectors there. And it's that kind of resilient which means that we didn't need to impose tubs or hosepipe bans, as they're colloquially known, in 2022. We've also got to manage demand, and there's a number of things we're doing that, primarily focused around the rolling out of smart meters. So by the end of this financial year, around half of our customers will be on a smart meter, and that will be complete by 2030. And that's showing some great results. When we connect smart meters, we find that about 10 or 11% of customers have a continuous flow. If we're able to eliminate those leaks, it means that customers are only using the water that they actually would actually want to. But also smart metering will provide really good evidence in terms of whether our water efficiency work is on target. Are the targets that local authorities adopting in their plans actually being met? Alongside this, we'll also continue work on our own leakage. We have the lowest leakage levels in the industry, but we have further ambition to reduce that by 2050. We've also got work around non-household water efficiency. So around about a quarter of our overall demand is related to non-household. So it's important that even though they're not directly our customers anymore, since the wholesale resale separation, that we incentivize and work with retailers to help commercial customers reduce their consumption. But we do have a particular challenge around what we call non-domestic demand. So we have a statutory obligation to provide water for domestic purposes. That doesn't necessarily mean houses. It means anywhere where water is being used in that way for cooking, washing, sanitation, and so on. So it includes schools, hospitals, hotels, that kind of thing. And we essentially have to prioritise that in situations where we don't have enough water, both for that purpose and non-domestic purposes. And that's led to some pretty tough decisions. We've had to decline requests for new non-household demand. Around 28 million litres per day declined last year, and an even greater number the year before. And obviously that has significant economic consequences. And it's something that we really want to work with local authorities, with government, to address, so that we've got more capacity in future to meet that. What we've had to do in the short term is to bring in a non-domestic policy position, and this really, I won't go through the detail of this, we've shared this with local authorities in our region, but essentially it sets out how we will evaluate requests for non-domestic water, and ensuring that we don't compromise the provision of domestic water, including the targets for household growth that are set out within local authority plans, which we follow. We provide water on a first come first served basis for non-domestic. That in itself is I mean, it's a practical consideration, it's a fairness consideration, but it does mean that we're not necessarily prioritising, say, net zero developments over other forms of industrial developments, and that's really a kind of policy question for others to address. We've also been working to develop a joint protocol on water efficiency, building on the great work that we've been doing with local authorities. So around 55 of the 58 local planning authorities in our region have or will have a policy position of 110 litres per person per day. But we're working with them to look at whether we can stretch this even further, hopefully to 100 litres per head per day, and we're hoping to publish that in the autumn. In terms of the non-domestic water demands, again, we're interested in working with local authorities about including the BREEAM targets for commercial development, and any new non-domestic development now requires a water resources assessment so that we can see whether the water is being used as efficiently as possible. We've got 2 new reservoirs that we're planning. One's already been referred to on the call, the Lincolnshire Reservoir near to Sleaford in Lincolnshire. The other is the Fens Reservoir, which we're developing jointly with Cambridge Water in Cambridgeshire. Both large developments going down a DCO route, and I'm not going to mention them too much more today. But the third kind of area is really been looking at desalination and really our adaptive plans going into the future. We know we're going to need some element of desalination. How much we need is going to depend on the final decisions around the environmental destination that I mentioned earlier. But we have 3 target locations for desalination in Norfolk, in Essex and in Lincolnshire. These schemes are not likely to meet the DCO threshold, so they're likely to go via LPA planning routes, but they're really important in terms of our kind of future makeup, and we want to start work on them soon. They're also important from a non-domestic point of view, given that the gas grid, for example, comes into the UK at Bacton, and that Mablethorpe is close to the Humber industrial cluster, which is the biggest industrial cluster in the UK. So just by way of discussion points, there will be this ongoing focus on demand management, and we very much welcome the help we've had from LPAs and wish to extend that in future to ensure that we can adopt realistic but stretching water efficiency targets. The Forward Infrastructure Programme, like other companies that we have, is significant. I think it's particularly important to note that we have a large variety of schemes. I've not focused on the WINEP schemes, for example, that Wessex have, but we have our own very large programme for that. Also very diverse location. Obviously, we cover 58 LPAs, so it's a big geographical patch. Often working with other agencies alongside the LPAs, including the Crown Estate, the Marine Management Organisation, and so on. We do also have some concerns about the capacity of statutory organisations to respond, and we're really keen to work further with those organisations to assist with resources and funding where necessary. And as I think has been referred to earlier, there's quite a lot of careful navigation needed around things like the habitats regulations and other environmental assessments and things that are required. So finally, just some conclusions. As I've mentioned, the availability of water very much limited within our region. Primarily, that's to do with leaving more water in important environments, such as chalk streams, but means that we have to think about replumbing and finding new sources of water within our region. We have to prioritise the provision of water for domestic purposes, at least in the short term. We're really keen to work closely with LPAs and other bodies, both on demand and the supply schemes. And together, we should be able to find a way through to find both sufficient water for nature and for people. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you to all of our speakers. So we've got around 10 minutes for some questions. So I would invite Dan, Nick, Emma, Dave, Gareth and Jeff just to come back on the screen, and we can go through some questions. I mean, just some reflections from me. It seems like of the issues raised so far, we've got a combination of needing some more national guidance on issues like BMG, and just wider LPA resource issues, and also then potentially looking at more national kind of permitted development rights, perhaps being updated for some of the new innovations coming forward. But I think it's been really useful to hear the other examples that are coming through in terms of stakeholder resource funding, planning workshops, programme PPAs, effective pre-apps, because that's all something that I think local authorities can get their head around. And I suppose one initial question before we open the floor is how is it best for LPAs to engage with their water companies if they haven't already heard from them, and how best to kind of get that early talking happening. Any reflections or any thoughts from anyone on that?
I can go, Rachel, if that's okay.
Oh, go on, Dave.
No, I was going to say, in terms of we've got similar roles to what Emma's doing at Wessex Water. We've now got area stakeholder managers. So we've split it into 5 counties, and we've got 5 county stakeholder managers, and they are now our first port of call, if you like, into local authorities. I think we've got so many touch points with local authorities that the messages can get lost, and nobody in UU knows the whole picture, so you end up with conversations going on all over the place, and you try to get your arms around it. So I think a bit like Wessex, we've established, a county stakeholder manager that would be the first port of call for that, and then I suppose within that framework, we then face into the planning leads, the directors associated with planning and their teams. But for us, it does start with a similar role to Emma, I think.
Great, thank you, Dave. We've got some hands up. So, Andrew, did you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, thank you. It was more of a.
Sorry, I think I've lost Andrew. Has everyone else lost Andrew? Yeah.
Yes.
We'll come back to Andrew perhaps in a minute. Jeff, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think just again a reflection really on the point Dave just made about how do we start to bridge the gap between us all. We seem to have unfortunately fortunately gone from a system whereby we're sort of operating like this to operating a lot more like this. And if anybody could see my hands on the screen there, they would see that they were ever closing circles of what I was trying to describe as a Venn diagram, because the central point on all of this is that we need to understand each other's businesses. We need to understand each other's priorities, but it's very much about getting on the front foot. In terms of plan making and decision making to some degree, we have to understand that a transactional relationship with water utilities companies is just simply not going to cut it. There's too much at stake, really, and I think it's very much about planning in plan policy terms, with one eye really on the business planning processes that you guys go through on your 5-yearly program, but very much understanding the interrelationship that you have with us in terms of managing environmental issues. And for us, that's very much around phosphates and nitrates and all of that piece. But it's about just unlocking, which is just a conversational piece, really. The kind of whole issue around what do we in local planning authorities need, coming back a little on transactional stuff, but fundamentally, what do you guys need from us? And sort of framing some of those intelligent questions really about data sharing and understanding geography of growth that we've tried to plan for over a 15 or 20 year cycle, as much as also understanding the pressures on you guys in terms of water utilities companies in regards to customer satisfaction, pricing, Ofwat's demands, all of that stuff. I think it's about trying to operate really together to try to alleviate any sort of uncertainty about who leads on what, but also trying to work together to get some sort of synergistic solutions to a lot of the problems that are out there. So no question, I'm afraid, Rachel, but a bit of a take from Wiltshire's perspective.
Great, thank you, Jeff. any reflections back from anyone on those comments? I think we have lost Andrew. There's a couple of questions in the chat, perhaps about the details of some of the projects that come through. So I don't know if you have any case studies that you can share, or any further details on, I think, the water saving policies. I think that would be really useful, as Jeff mentioned about the data sharing. Yeah, Dan, I'll let you come in. Oh, sorry, I thought, Dan, you were speaking.
No, sorry.
Yeah, are you do the water companies share any of their case studies on their websites on some of the details of the projects that you've mentioned? I mean, we will share the slides.
We've certainly got dedicated web pages for the HARP and the West Cumbria project on the United Utilities website, yeah.
Rachel, we have not the two I specifically mentioned because they're live and work in progress, but ones we've done in the past are absolutely on our website, as well as case studies. Also, the kind of R&D we've done around them and the learning as well is there.
Great, thank you. I think that's a useful port of call. A question here about whether you engage with Historic England in the pre-app. Have you got standard sort of statutory consultees that you approach with your projects?
Yeah. So I'll speak for Gareth as well, because I know he's not well. But so sorry, Emma. But yeah, so Historic England would be one, and actually Sport England. So Sport England would be mentioned about the sports pictures and stuff and the interface there. So yeah, we've got our desktop assessments. We'll pick that sort of stuff up, and then we'd go around the stakeholders, and I suppose in an attempt to take all the stakeholders on the journey. By the time we get to planning submission stage, there are no surprises. Everybody knows what's coming, and everybody's happy with it. But that's easier said than done, isn't it? But that would be the intent, yeah.
Yeah, and we've also been trying to engage with Historic England on top of other statutory bodies in our Water Resource Management Plan, DWMP as well, so that they've got even earlier kind of involvement in our own strategic plans before we get to the point of a planning application. Yeah. So yeah, recognising that obviously the time you get to a planning application, you're a long way down the track effectively. So yeah, trying to cover off all bases.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll invite, if anyone else would like to put their hand up to come in to for a question. Otherwise, I might hand back to Dan and Nick just for some reflections and potentially to talk through perhaps some options for future events, because I know that's something that we had discussed before. So I'll just pause. Yeah, so in terms of some of the detailed questions we can take away and respond more fully to, but Nick and Dan, can I hand back over to you just for some final reflections about perhaps some future events?
There's another question actually that's just come in the chat, which might be worth one of the companies talking about, sort of the interaction between housing and water.
I've had quick scans. So probably if I've misread there, I think I don't know about the specific situation that's been highlighted there. So I'll offer just some general reflections. I think it goes back to the observation that that was made earlier, that the different frameworks that we're all asked to work towards, not through any individual's fault at all, but they come with their own set of deadlines and they're managed somewhat in a siloed manner. And I think what we'd really like to do is to try and open more of that up, so the local plan speaks more directly to the water resource management plan and vice versa, in whichever order that needs to go into, and so on. So situations like the one described are less likely to arise. So I think again, without getting into the specifics, and certainly not speaking for the company involved there, it's situations like that I think we're very keen to try and avoid through more integration exactly of these different strategic planning frameworks, to make sure that water can play the role of enabling development as it has done and will continue to do so. But there will be potential bugs in the system if we're not thinking a bit more strategically about how national housing targets look at the level of drinking water catchment. Those sorts of issues, really important that those are teased out well ahead of time, and and the planning system doesn't become the point at which those inconsistencies emerge, because by that point there's already a lot of commitment and money and stuff up on the table. So I think we have a shared endeavour to make sure that those kind of situations don't arise as far as possible.
Thank you, Nick. Gareth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Just a quick one, really, just on Anthony's question about us, how we kind of plan for housing growth. So the business plans that we've mentioned that have gone into the AMP8 plans, kind of baked into those plans is our understanding of where the growth is coming from. So, to our asset base, can we cope? Where do we need to invest to provide that growth and that resilience to accommodate the growth? So we have teams, and I know the other companies on the call have teams that they go in and speak to local plans teams, they get that data, and then they come back and they say, look, we're getting all this growth over here, we're getting this urban extension here, we're going to have to do something, and that then feeds into the plans that get submitted, Rachel. Just wanted to make that clear. The water resource management plan, by the way, is a 25-year look ahead, so we're constantly scanning the horizon for where the growth is going to come to give ourselves time.
Thank you, Gareth. And certainly, I think that's the complexity of it all, isn't it? With the strategic planning that's needed for delivering water, as well as then sort of the immediacy of some of the planning applications coming forward day to day. Well, thank you to all the speakers attending today. Thank you for everyone coming along to the webinar. I hope that was useful to everyone. We would be happy to do some more events in the future if there's topics, and I do wonder whether perhaps SUDS might be another area that might be of interest to people, and there's lots obviously happening in towns on that as well. But I'd just like to thank Dan and Nick from Water UK, and Dave, Emma, Gareth and Jeff from all their respective water companies, and thank you to everyone for attending. So have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Rachel.